What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. So over the weekend, some controversy hit Sony when it comes to their terms of service, apparently banning you from reselling your physical PlayStation 5 games. Well, the internet, of course, dug into this, and it appears we may have been here before, but we'll go over that here today. Also, we are going to be talking about a really interesting discovery that was made, some lost footage that appears to show a certain feature in action for the Nintendo 64 and Mario 64. And we'll also be talking about Xbox, as it appears they could be set to launch their next generation console a bit sooner than we thought. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button, helps out a ton. And if new here to the SpawnWave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. And we're gonna start today with Embracer Group, TimeSplitters, Free Radical Design. As we know, of course, all that got cut down after Embracer seemingly had to backpedal from their big spending spree they were going on after a $2 billion deal fell through, and they've been doing all kinds of layoffs and dissolving different studios left and right, I guess, to try to balance out the books. And unfortunately, TimeSplitters was one of the cuts. Well, out of nowhere, some concept art was just posted on Reselling, and this, you can see a bunch of images. It's posted up by a user by the name of Bayonetta, and yeah, this looks pretty good. Now, I mean, concept art, 3D renderings or drawings, ideas of what they were going to do with the game. It seems like they had some pretty large areas set up. They have like a western area here, which is pretty cool, and like a jungle kind of area. It looks like this was setting up to be even maybe a bigger project than I was thinking. I was kind of envisioning a smaller TimeSplitters game. Seems like they had quite a few ideas. Doesn't necessarily mean they're all going to get to the finish line, which, I mean, obviously the game itself didn't get there, but like in general, you usually come up with a bunch of ideas and then just stuff ends up on the cutting room floor. I am curious if there was a build of the game that was at least done enough to just kind of run and test things out, and if we ever see that leak out there, because in general, things are just a mess at Embracer, so that wouldn't shock me if someone was like, you know what, I would like to see what we had going here for TimeSplitters. I'm just gonna maybe anonymously drop this and let this get out there. But at least for now, we have some concept art you can look over and see what could have been. Also, we did get a release date for Saga Emerald Beyond, this being a new game in the Saga franchise. And we had a full trailer that was released here. And this game is coming out April 25th, 2024. So not too far off, 5 months or so. And this one surprised a lot of us when it was shown in that Nintendo Direct to hear that there is a brand new Saga game coming out. And I think it looks pretty good. Although, again, it's definitely more of a niche crowd that's going to be picking up different games in the Saga franchise. It's just really cool to see Square continuing this one. But the trailer looks good, not too far off, so I'm sure I'll be able to check it out at some point. We'll see what else is releasing around that time, because I could also see this easily becoming a backlog game for me, but let me know if you have this one on your radar. Oh, and as expected, we did have numbers announced for the Game Awards, specifically for viewership, which we can see this posted up over on their Twitter account. They say with over 118 million global live streams, the 2023 edition of the Game Awards was our most watched show ever. Thank you for watching. Okay, 118 million live streams, that's up 15% year over year. I mean, they're impressive numbers, just outright, and it goes to show you why Jeff Keighley is able to get some of these big-time announcements, just because a ton of people watch the awards show, and it all happens in one night. You can get, of course, your game or your controller or your system or whatever in front of people. Yeah, you'll pay out quite a bit of money, and this is just, again, Jeff, who's really moved into that position to essentially control like the entirety of gaming, big gaming announcement events like the Game Awards, like Summer Games Fest, like Opening Night Live for Gamescom. And I feel like he probably has one more event in him just to have one per quarter, but we'll see if that ends up being a thing down the road. As for now, though, it appears the Game Awards just continues to grow rapidly. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with Sony and controversy that's hit the PlayStation platform when it comes to physical ownership of your game, specifically ownership that would allow you to sell your game if you would like to. Maybe you want to trade it in, or hey, maybe you just want to post it up on Craigslist because you don't want the game anymore and you just want money to buy another game, or really anything at that point, right? But that's always been the big advantage of buying physically, is there is a way to recoup some of that money when you resell it, or technically, if it's a collector's item, maybe it can appreciate in value down the line. Well, Sony's terms of service doesn't really seem to align with that vision necessarily. And this was brought up by RGT over on his channel with his video that is titled "Sony Says It's Illegal to Sell Your PS5 Games." And in this video, he does cite what appears to be the software usage terms, and it's going to be different in each region. So I believe the one he was checking was in Europe. It's also similar in, I believe, New Zealand, but it's not necessarily one that is covering the US and every other region as well. So again, region by region basis here. However, Europe does seem to be affected by this, and it's actually been talked about before, which we'll get to, but we can see line 7 or 7.1 here. You must not resell either disc-based games or digital games unless expressly authorized by us, and if the publisher is another company, additionally by that publisher. That is a very weird line, I will admit. Looking at that, it sounds like Sony does not want you to take that disc that you bought from GameStop and go off and resell it or trade it in, I guess. Although I figured you have like GameStop and others that take those trade-ins or resell games as authorized dealers. Now, this is not the first time that this has come up, actually. In fact, it came up 10 years ago, and people really had to go digging deep for this because, again, it was 2013, and there were messages that were put out by Shuhei Yoshida even in response to people noticing the terms of service back in 2013. And in fact, we can see this from that year. Him saying, "If you're concerned about our new European TOS terms of service, we confirm that you are able to sell or share your disc PS4 products, including in EU." So a lot of people are still asking the question, why is this there? Because look, it's not something that Sony's going to be able to enforce at all, really. And I look at this, I do scratch my head. Why is that there? I'm just thinking, okay, they're trying to cover all their bases with very broad language like that, and the best I can come up with is they're saying if you start burning games from your copy, you can't sell that, and it's just a wide net that covers it. Or if they come across people on different websites, eBay, Craigslist, which we know Sony has gone before to eBay and bought hacked systems to basically catch people in the act of having like a bunch of software that's been modded and dumped onto a system and sold. And maybe that's a way that they can point to terms of service. But at the end of the day, that's just their terms of service. It's not law necessarily. And I don't think this is something that would hold up in a courtroom anyway. So it's just strange that it's there, but it's not going to really affect anyone. And in fact, think about it. It's been there for 10 years. Have you ever heard of anyone getting stopped by Sony for selling games on Craigslist or secondhand markets like eBay? But still, I am curious why this is there in the terms of service. And if you're someone who maybe is a bit more familiar with the legal side of things, let me know down in the comments and give us an idea as to why Sony is saying you can't resell your physical PlayStation 5 games unless it's authorized by them. Next up, let's talk about Microsoft and the idea that they could launch their next generation Xbox as soon as 2026. So we could be technically, we'll say 3 years away from the next generation system launching, which would then be a year of run-up, we assume. So we might hear about this thing in 2 years. That at least is the talk going around right now. And if you think about it, Phil Spencer did say, we're good without a mid-gen refresh, and we know apparently Sony is preparing a PlayStation 5 Pro based on many different reports now. So when you start seeing some of these messages go up, for example, on Twitter, Kepler was the big one that was pointed out, and this was from months ago, actually, where they were mentioning that Xbox Next is earlier than that, saying Xbox Next isn't that far away. I've heard very different things. All this talking about that refresh that leaked out from the FTC, where they were going to remove the disk drive, and it was adorably all digital, and upgrade the Wi-Fi, that sort of thing. Well, we also had Jeff Grubb over on Game Mess, and this blew up pretty quickly, discussing the idea and even citing a source saying there are rumors out there from someone who was part of leaking this stuff on the PlayStation side, but that person is now also saying that Xbox will have their own Xbox Next in 2026, whether that's the Pro or a full follow-up console. This leaker is saying that stuff is canceled and that they're going to do the next Xbox faster than they do otherwise, maybe moving the start of the next generation by a couple of years. I hope they don't call it Xbox Next, because that That is an annoying name to have to go over and say over and over and over again. But nonetheless, the idea of Microsoft trying to start the generation earlier than Sony, I mean, it's not hard to believe. That was the one time they were really successful, was when they jumped ahead with the Xbox 360 and they were right alongside the PS3 the whole way. They also needed Sony to stumble out of the gate, which they did an incredible job of during E3 2006. We all remember that. But it's still, having that year advantage really helped set the tone for that generation and look at the Xbox 360 as like the default system, which is something Microsoft has had a really hard time with ever since really the Xbox One. And if you think about it, that would be a 6-year cycle for the generation, which is about what we were used to before the Xbox 360 and the PS3 generation ran just a bit longer. Otherwise, before that, Sony was pretty used to a 6-year cycle. Now, the other question would be, how would Microsoft work to improve this to differentiate it from the current generation with the Xbox Series? And I've seen a lot of speculation around them leaning heavily into AI being built in, or maybe just cloud being built in so that it can do extra computations it wouldn't be able to do otherwise, or locally on the system. And these are all possibilities, but it's interesting still to just think about generations, because I feel like a lot of that is kind of going away now, since we basically expect backwards compatibility to be just default. When the PS6 comes out, people are going to expect their PS4 games just to work on it in their digital library to continue on. So how much longer until we don't have PS4, PS5, PS6, PS7 underneath the game? It's just PlayStation, and everything just kind of works as you go along, and you get replacement boxes, and that's kind of it. I actually think we're pretty close to that. And in fact, I wouldn't be shocked if something like the PS6, especially after the PS5 Pro, seemed like even less of a jump than what we just had with the PS4 Pro to the PS5. But interesting to consider that Microsoft could be working to prep their next generation system. What do you think about the idea of that? Microsoft trying to jump out a bit ahead, and would you want to buy a new Xbox generation or start a new generation in 2026? Next up, let's talk about a very interesting discovery that was made that seems to show Nintendo demoing multiplayer in Mario 64 ahead of the Nintendo 64's launch. Now, I saw this, you can see posted up by Luigi Blood. This is over on Twitter or X, saying, here's your only official footage of multiplayer Super Mario 64 from a Space World 95 video kiosk, as the camera clearly focuses on both characters. What's interesting is this is from just footage that was shared, like this is obviously very old footage from, I'm sure, one of those really big video cameras with the VHS tape on the side. But this was shared in footage from 3 weeks ago. It's just kind of been sitting on YouTube, and apparently it was randomly recommended to Luigi Blood, and they caught that as they were going through it. It's like the 13-minute mark or so, and I'm not even kidding, like 2 seconds of panning over and catching that other CRT showcasing two characters in Mario 64. It almost looks like one is kind of crawling around a bit. The other one's had jumped and is coming back down maybe. But the fact that it was demoed does play into some of the conversations Miyamoto has had in the past, that they were at least working on it. They had the idea of a room and two characters would kind of run around in it, and they would clear different objectives. And I guess it just wasn't able to make the cut, whether it's for frame rate, time constraints. I mean, they weren't exactly pushing multiplayer modes or patches through the internet back then. Now, there's also a conversation if one of those characters is Luigi, and I mean, it would make sense. You have Mario, you have Luigi. However, some are pointing out that there is kind of this color bleed if you look at a CRT just right with a larger camera from that time, and it's possible that the two characters both just Mario, as it's being shown off at Space World, clearly as a demo, as like a proof of concept that, yeah, we could do multiplayer, and that would obviously work to show off the multiplayer components of the Nintendo 64 with 4 controller slots, but still having 2 3D characters running around using the joystick. That was a big deal back then. So it makes sense that they would want to show it off at a technical level at Space World 95. But certainly a really cool find here, and I think it's awesome that randomly something can just be uploaded to YouTube, even sit there for weeks on end, and then someone goes through and spots like 2 seconds worth of that video for a discovery like this. It's just, you never know what's going to pop up on the internet tomorrow. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about some bad news for fans of the original Crew. So not the Crew 2, not Crew Motorfest, the first Crew game from Ubisoft. It appears they are shutting the servers down, which means that the game just won't work anymore. Now, this we can see was posted up over on their website with a notice, where they say today the Crew 1, including alt editions and virtual currency packs, will be delisted from all online stores. The game will remain playable until March 31st, 2024 for all the Crew 1 owners. After this date, the servers will be shut down, which means that the game will not be accessible anymore on any platform, including PC, Xbox 360, Xbox One, PlayStation 4, and oh look, Amazon Luna and Ubisoft. I keep forgetting that Amazon Luna is a thing. Now, they do cite licensing issues, which, I mean, yeah, car games go through this constantly, and then also just server costs, which I do wonder how many people are playing the Crew 1 with the Crew 2 and the Crew Motorfest. Let me know if you're a big Crew fan, if there is like a massive advantage for that original Crew game. But we see this a lot with driving games, as I mentioned. I mean, Microsoft can't even keep their own like Forza games up on their store, because over time the licensing with the different car companies, manufacturers, they just run out and they don't renew them, because usually there's a new Forza that takes its place. We ran into the situation where Forza Motorsport recently hadn't come out yet, but Forza Motorsport 7 was removed because those licensing issues popped up. So this isn't necessarily surprising to me. It's like, okay, there's Crew, there's any of the Forza Motorsports from previous years, there's Drive Club. It's a pretty consistent thing, but it of course shows for something like the Crew, with its reliance on an online connection, that yeah, these games just kind of get lost to time. It's like, okay, there goes the Crew, there goes Mag. It's just a consistent thing that is unfortunate, especially if, yeah, you're a fan of the original Crew. And before we go to the comments of the day, we're going to take a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday, which is Game of the Year Madness. That's right, and Armored Core 6 took on Resident Evil 4, and it does look like this is the end of the line for Armored Core 6, kind of as you expect, since you can see Resident Evil 4 is one of the top seeds in the entire bracket, and look, Armored Core 6 did really, really well in the Game of the Year Madness bracket here, but again, RE4, what are you going to do about that? But this actually concludes the current round, and we're getting down to like the semifinals, and things are going to get pretty serious with some of these matchups, which also means we have to have a live stream here pretty soon in the coming days, so make sure you stay tuned for that. This time, though, I will schedule it out and I will announce it, because last time I caught some of you off guard a bit, but no, we're going to go through some of the matchups, and there are definitely some pretty compelling ones in there to look at. And we'll finish up with the comment of the day, as you're seeing here. This is from Cassie saying, I'd sure like to see a new Phantasy Star single-player RPG if Sega decides to go all in. Wouldn't that be something? Got a brand new, at least semi-large budget, we'll say, behind a new Phantasy Star game. I mean, I look at Phantasy Star now, and I think Sega sees it as their MMO intellectual property now with Phantasy Star Online 2. That's shown its age at this time, and if anything, they might just make a third one or just an original title, but still that massive multiplayer side to it. I feel like if you want a JRPG or an RPG from the past with Sega in mind, Skies of Arcadia makes a ton of sense, and if anything, they could try a remaster just to see if there's interest. Like, let's just remaster it, put it on all the different platforms, and see what happens. If people are buying it and they get excited about it, then start putting some money into the idea of a brand new Skies of Arcadia, because I think that could definitely be their single-player RPG with a decent budget behind it, and they could probably keep Phantasy Star where it is as kind of that multiplayer style game. That said, I'd be perfectly fine if they want to take a shot at a brand new Phantasy Star game that is completely single-player, as long as they do it right, because some of those Phantasy Star games from back in the day were really, really good. Something like Phantasy Star 4 was like top tier. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today, where there's Sony apparently barring you from selling your physical PS5 games, at least according to their terms of service. What do you think that is all about? And then also, Microsoft may be starting the next generation a bit sooner in 2026, and the discovery that was made, Space World 95, 2 Marios, or a Mario and Luigi running around in Mario 64. What do you think that game would have been like if we did have co-op enabled at launch? Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.